They walked out of their engagement party like any other couple, hand in hand, eyes glowing, but just 6 hours later, both vanished from Atlanta as if they had never existed. On a sweltering July night in 2010 at the Rooftop Bar, Neon Gardenia high-end spot in the heart of Atlanta, music pulsed through the air as artificial fireworks lit up the sky. Kamari Brooks, 28, a game designer from West End, and his fiancée Ayanna Reed, 26, a financial advisor from Decatur, had just celebrated their engagement with nearly 40 guests. Everyone said. They were meant to be laughing, taking pictures, dancing. They left the party a little after 1 a.m. and were never seen again. No phone activity, no bank transactions, no record of Kamari's car ever leaving the parking lot. Police investigated but found nothing. The bar's security footage from that night malfunctioned. Friends said they'd gone somewhere private. Family said there's no way. And then 13 years later, an architecture student stumbled upon an outdated city map, a hidden passage, a door leading to a truth Atlanta had either overlooked or chosen to forget. Kamari Brooks was born in 1982 and grew up in Atlanta's West End neighborhood rich in culture. Slowly being choked by gentrification, he was the middle child of 3. His mother, Leona, a retired nurse. His father, Curtis Brooks, a former construction worker, passed away from cancer when Kamari was just 13. Life wasn't easy, but from a young age, Kamari had a vivid imagination and a deep love for technology, while other kids played basketball in the streets. Young Kamari sat beside an old computer his father salvaged from a tech dump, patiently teaching himself how to code using secondhand books and CD-ROMs. After graduating from Booker T. Washington High School, Kamari didn't go to college. Instead, he waited tables at night and taught himself to program by day. He learned through online forums, joined indie game communities, and at 25, he released his first game and adventure inspired by his family, history called Ghosts of Summerhill. It never went viral, but it caught the attention of a few domestic studios. From there, Kamari transitioned into freelance work, becoming an independent game designer, living off contract gigs and creative projects. He wasn't wealthy, but he lived his passion. He rented a small third-floor apartment in a brick building in West End, decorated with LED lights, digital drawing boards, and stacks of books on Atlanta's history. He didn't just make game, she told stories the world had forgotten, especially those from his own community. The characters in his games often resembled folks from his block, the jazz-singing neighbor, the cobbler who spoke 4 languages, and his younger brother Malik, who once got wrongly arrested just for wearing a hoodie in the summer. Kamari was soft-spoken, but when he told a story, people stopped talking. Everyone who met him said he had eyes that looked like they could see the future. In a world always rushing forward, Kamari moved slowly, where every detail mattered. But what truly made people care for him wasn't just his talent. It was his quiet kindness, dropping off groceries for his mom every week, fixing laptops for neighborhood kids for free, or just sitting for hours, listening without judgment. That quietness is what drew in Ayanna, someone his complete opposite. Ayanna Reed was born in 1984, the only daughter of Cynthia Reed, an elementary school teacher, and Ronald Reed, a retired electrician. The family lived in a quiet residential neighborhood in Decatur, just east of Atlanta, from a young age. Ayanna was a natural organizer, running class meetings in kindergarten, starting book clubs in high school. She was known as the girl who always knew what she wanted, and often helped others figure out what they wanted too. Ayanna was a top student, earning a scholarship to Georgia State University to study finance, but she didn't pursue a traditional banking career. Instead, she became a financial advisor for families and small businesses in the Black community. She believed the best way to preserve culture is to help people keep their homes, their shops, their land. She went door to door teaching people how to budget, explaining loan contracts, translating legal finance jargon into everyday language that elders could understand. In a world where money often creates distance, Ayanna became a bridge not through power, but through trust. She helped an elderly woman save her home from foreclosure due to a misunderstanding over property taxes, saved a historic hair salon from demolition during rezoning, and spent weeks filing tax returns for people who had never done them right in their lives. Ayanna wasn't just smart, she had impeccable taste. She loved vintage dresses, handmade crafts, and collecting antique teacups from flea markets. She lived in a ground-floor apartment in Oakhurst, a small red brick unit with walls covered in finance charts, family photos, and handwritten quotes like, "We build legacy from love." Not land, though logical by nature. Ayanna was deeply emotional. Every year on her mother's birthday, she wrote a 3-page handwritten letter among friends. She was the big sister, the one who, when someone lost a loved one, showed up quietly with food and stayed without saying much. She was also blunt, sometimes to a fault, but everyone knew she only said hard truths out of care. She met Kamari at a community finance seminar. They debated the value of simulation games versus real-world economics and kept talking afterward, slowly. Two seemingly opposite worlds, tech and finance, introvert and extrovert, fell into rhythm. Their love wasn't flashy, no drama, just steady. They understood each other in ways few could: the loneliness of being a trailblazer and the weight of always carrying others' hopes. Kamari would sketch Ayanna into his games. Ayanna proudly introduced Kamari to her colleagues as the person who makes me believe art can save the world. So when they got engaged, both families were overjoyed. Friends were thrilled. Everyone thought this is the kind of couple that changes things. But fate had other plans. On the night of July 24, 2010, Atlanta was hot and humid like any other southern summer. But the rooftop of Neon Garden glowed bright with laughter and light. It was Kamari and Ayanna's engagement party, a rare night where guests from every part of their lives came together: indie artists, financial advisors, coders, teachers, barbers, old classmates, neighbors, and co-workers. The rooftop shimmered golden string lights above, cocktail tables adorned with vintage books and retro game controllers. Kamari's playlist, hand-picked, opened with jazz, transitioned to R&B, and closed with lo-fi beats. Ayanna wore a cream satin dress, her hair softly pinned. Kamari, a black silk shirt embroidered with the logo of his first game. They didn't give speeches, just grabbed the mic briefly to thank everyone for believing in love and in our work. Guests remembered Ayanna smiling nonstop, hugging everyone with warmth. Kamari was quieter but kept pouring drinks for friends, nodding as people reminisced. Some family members thought he looked tired, maybe from overworking to finish his latest demo. Ayanna's friend, Tori, a stylist, recalled Ayanna pulling her aside on the balcony, whispering, "I'm happy," but I'm scared, not of him, just how fast everything's moving. Around 1:20 a.m., Kamari and Ayanna left the party. They told some they were heading home, told others they had something private to handle. Kamari's Chevy Impala was last seen in the parking lot at 1:15, but no one remembers seeing them drive away. The bar's security cameras, the only potential, led were down. "Software update error," said the manager. "No footage, no clips." No one could recall the exact moment they vanished. The next morning, Ayanna missed her bridal fitting, something she'd never done. Kamari didn't send in his game. Demo had never missed a deadline. Friends texted, Khaled no response. Both phones went straight to voicemail. Ayanna's best friend, Zariah, went to her Oakhurst apartment. Everything was neat, nothing stolen, no signs of struggle. Kamari's laptop was still on in his studio, the game map unfinished. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't burnout. Something was wrong. It was like the city had swallowed them whole quietly, without a sound, without a trace. And then came the silence that lasted for 13 years, in the first 3 days. Most people thought Kamari and Ayanna had simply taken a break from the world, maybe off somewhere for a digital detox, or just carving out some private space. But the uneasy feeling among their loved ones quickly turned to real fear. Kamari had never left his phone off for more than a day, and Ayanna, she once called Zariah 15 times just because she hadn't replied to a message in 10 hours. Now total silence. On day 4. Zariah filed a police report. Both were officially listed as missing, a rare move for an adult couple with no criminal history, living independently. The responding officer was sympathetic but direct. "We've seen plenty of adults go off the grid voluntarily, especially after big life events like engagements. But to family and friends, that made no sense. Neither of them had packed a bag. No money had been withdrawn. Ayanna's fridge was still stocked. Kamari's latest game was in testing phase, and a half-written email to a publisher still sat open on his screen. Every sign pointed to plans for tomorrow, not an escape from today. Kamari's Chevy Impala was also missing from the bar's lot, security cameras in that area malfunctioning. The bar manager said they hadn't been maintained properly. Only blurry footage of a few guests leaving around 1:10 a.m. was recovered. After that, nothing but darkness. Police interviewed party guests, nearly 40 people from all walks of life. Most didn't see Kamari or Ayanna after 1 a.m. A few remembered them standing near the secondary elevator. Someone mentioned hearing a quiet argument, but couldn't say who it was. No one could confirm seeing them actually leave the building. Zariah pushed for phone tracking, but both phones had gone dark at exactly 1:34 a.m. No GPS signal, no email, social media, or banking logins. It was as if someone had cut every digital tether all at once. The family started posting flyers, organizing prayer circles in West End and Decatur. They appeared on local news, pleading for any information. But after 2 weeks, not a single solid lead emerged. The media moved on. The story slipped down the timeline. The city, as always, kept moving. But the waiting remained, like the empty chair at Cynthia's breakfast table, where she still placed a teacup for her daughter every morning, 3 weeks after the disappearance. As the headlines faded, a homeless man named Howard, who often slept near an abandoned industrial lot in southeast Atlanta, walked into the Edgewood police station. He wasn't sure, he said. But the night Kamari and Ayanna vanished. Sometime after 2 a.m., he heard a loud argument near an old warehouse in the East Terminal Logistics Complex, place long abandoned since its warehouse days in the 80s. Howard said he first thought it was just drunk kids, but peeking through a rusted metal crack, he saw a dark sedan, possibly an Impala, and a man pulling someone inside the building. He couldn't make out faces, didn't catch the license plate, but in the dark, he clearly heard a voice say, "You don't have to do this. We can talk." Then silence, then tires screeching. Police checked the warehouse site. Nothing. No tire marks, no cameras. The doors were padlocked from the outside. They couldn't verify Howard's story, but in his statement, Howard mentioned some red writing, looked like a name, maybe Mara sprayed on a wall near a busted light. Zariah, hearing about it from someone on the investigation team, went to the warehouse that weekend with a few friends. They slipped in through a broken side gate, no security. Inside, pitch black, cold, reeking of rust and mold. After nearly an hour, they found a crumbling concrete wall with peeling paint. On it, in red spray paint, Ayanna plus Marie help us. The group stood frozen. Zariah snapped a photo and sent it to police. But when she returned 2 days later with others, the message was gone. Painted over in gray, the warehouse door welded shut, as if someone wanted the evidence buried. That time, Zariah went to the press, posting the image online. Within days, Twitter and Facebook reignited. The hashtag #FindYannaMari began trending. Under pressure from the public and the media, police were forced to reopen the case, but they still couldn't find any physical evidence strong enough to pursue charges or further leads. Their statement read, "The witness account is notable, but insufficient to confirm a criminal act. We will continue to monitor. But for loved ones," those red, uneven words help. Us became an obsession. Was it a real cry for help, or someone cruel playing games? Either way, it was the first and only sign, suggesting Kamari and Ayanna had been there, had been alive, had tried to tell the world they needed saving. That message sparked a groundswell, not just from friends and family, but from strangers who'd never heard of Kamari or Ayanna until then, within a week. Over 50,000 people signed a petition demanding a formal reinvestigation. A national news outlet sent reporters to Atlanta, producing a segment on the disappearance and the overlooked clues. One reporter asked aloud, if this had been a white couple from Midtown, would they have been found by now? But as the cameras left, and the hashtags cooled, those left behind were still waiting, and the toll showed. Kamari's mother, Leona, began losing sleep. She'd sit on her porch staring into the dark, waiting for a car that never came. Cynthia, Ayanna's mom, left her teaching job, went part-time, and spent her days walking through abandoned city lots like she might find her daughter herself. Zariah, trying to keep public focus alive, created a blog compiling everything: timelines, party photos, maps of the warehouse zone. But weeks later, she started receiving anonymous emails, messages hinting she was digging into things better left buried. One read, "They don't want to be found. Maybe you should disappear for a few days and see what it feels like." Zariah filed a police report, but like before, no investigation, no charges, no suspects. Meanwhile, something else happened. Darnell, the architecture student who'd helped digitally map the warehouse zone, found his car's tires slashed one night on campus. No one was arrested. The security cameras had obstructed views, blocked by a delivery truck. No one could prove any of this was connected to the disappearance, but fear spread like oil on water. People spoke less. Vigils drew fewer crowds. Facebook groups quieted. The city moved on. New buildings rose where East Terminal once stood. New signs, new concrete, new tenants. No one remembered the red words that once trembled on that gray wall, but for those who remained, the story never ended. It just sank like dust beneath poured concrete, still there, waiting for someone patient enough to knock on the walls and listen for whatever answers might lie within. In a short interview at the end of 2011, Cynthia said, "I don't need someone arrested. I don't need an apology. I just want to know, was my baby in pain? Did she say my name at the end? I just need one thing to know." Nearly 2 years after Kamari and Ayanna disappeared, their case slipped into that quiet category, but no longer active. Yet for a group of architecture students at Georgia Tech, it sparked a very different kind of question: how cities forget their own spaces. Darnell Rodza, senior who had been following Kamari's story from the beginning, began a thesis on forgotten structures in Atlanta's urban redevelopment, while reviewing old infrastructure maps. He uncovered a 1986 municipal survey. It marked a secondary transport route linking the East Terminal warehouse to the far edge of Kirkwood Yarda, path now erased from every official city map. Intrigued, Darnell and his classmate Naomi set out to explore, following the diagram. They crossed an abandoned fence and arrived at a sunken patch of land overgrown with weeds, the old endpoint of the forgotten route. After hours of searching, they stumbled upon a large metal hatch, nearly swallowed by the earth. Its surface was rusted, but near the hinges. The welding looked newer. Something felt off. They called the police, providing coordinates and photos. 3 days later, when investigators arrived, the hatch had been covered in tarp and bound with thick chains. No signs of forced entry, but also no sign of a thorough search. The internal report stated no clear evidence connecting this site to the missing persons, no legal grounds to open the structure. The case was shelved again, but Darnell couldn't shake the feeling. As he dug deeper, he discovered a network of old auxiliary tunnels once used for wartime transport, most now buried beneath new developments. He reviewed redevelopment plans from 2008 for East Terminal and spotted a familiar name among the investors: Vernon Cage. The name had appeared briefly before Ayanna's stepfather. He'd attended the engagement party. In initial accounts, Vernon was described as a successful businessman, backing several Atlanta reconstruction projects. But Darnell found troubling details. Several of Vernon's projects had faced protests over opaque foundation work, and there were past reports of off-the-books labor used for overnight builds. When Darnell tried to access those reports again, they had vanished from the city's database. This wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. When Darnell shared this with Zariah, she felt something tighten in her chest. Vernon Cage, Ayanna's stepfather, had always felt distant. He never really spoke to Kamari, barely said a word after Ayanna vanished. People assumed he was just reserved. But now, Zariah wasn't so sure. She began combing through old engagement party photos saved on an external drive. In one, Vernon stood at the rooftop's edge, watching Kamari and Ayanna embrace. His face was blurry, but his gaze didn't read joy. Beside him stood someone else, Rashawn Greera, former security contractor with longtime ties to Vernon. Rashawn wasn't on the guest list. Zariah decided to find him after weeks of asking around and spending some savings on a freelance investigator. She tracked Rashawn to a rental complex in South Riverdale. He worked night shifts as a guard at a private warehouse. One evening, she waited until his shift ended and confronted him. At first, Rashawn was guarded, but when Zariah mentioned Kamari and Ayanna, something flickered in his eyes. He denied everything. I wasn't at that party. You got the wrong guy. But then he said something that froze Zariah in place. You think you knew Ayanna. People don't always tell their best friend everything. Zariah had no proof, but her gut screamed he knew something. She gave his name and address to police. An officer followed up, but without a warrant or formal questioning. Rashawn slipped away again. Darnell, unwilling to let go, returned to the hatch site, this time alone, with a GoPro and a laser rangefinder. He couldn't open the hatch, but he noticed a narrow crack along the dirt wall. Shining a flashlight through it, something glinted back. Using a long clamp, he pulled it out a gold necklace. The pendant engraved a +K and the date of the engagement. He brought it to Zariah. Her eyes welled the moment she saw it. Ayanna wore this since 2008. She never took it off. It was the first confirmed item, after nearly 3 years, linked to Ayanna. Zariah submitted it to the Atlanta Police Department. They logged it as evidence, but the case file stayed closed. No DNA, no confirmed crime scene, no witnesses. Once again, it disappeared into the gray zone of not enough. That night, Zariah lay on her living room floor, clutching an old photo frame. She whispered, "If you're out there, Yana, I swear, I won't let them forget you." 3 years since Kamari and Ayanna vanished. A name no one expected re-emerged Ray Delane. He was Vernon Cage's longtime driver, discreet, soft-spoken, polite to a fault. The kind of person who blends into the background, but sometimes it's the quiet ones who see everything. Ray came into focus when freelance journalist Taylor Griggs investigated shady public land deals. One led her to the property where Ray lived down by a shell company tied to Vernon. Taylor hadn't been looking for Ray, but a neighbor, an elderly man, casually said, "Ray." He used to drive out to Kirkwood Yard all the time in 2010, late nights. One time I saw his car all muddy. That line struck a nerve. Taylor tracked Ray down. He refused interviews, but when she asked pointed questions, he didn't deny, he just stayed silent. On her third visit, this time at the pharmacy where he picked up blood pressure, meds, Ray looked her in the eye and said, "You ever think people can die twice, once when their body goes, oh, and once when no one says their name anymore?" Taylor froze. "Who are you talking about?" Ray didn't answer. But days later, an unmarked envelope appeared in her mailbox. Inside, a bank transfer receipt, Vernon Cage to a Bahamas account, in Rashawn Greer's name, dated July 27th, 2010. The memo line, Special Project Technical Consulting. The strange part, the receipt bore a watermark from a now defunct bank, meaning it could only have come from someone's private archive. Taylor turned it over to police. An internal affairs agent reviewed the evidence. But again, the conclusion, insufficient basis for criminal proceedings. Soon after, Ray disappeared. His apartment empty, car gone, phone disconnected. No one knew where he went. Taylor told Zariah everything. The two women sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Zariah whispered, "If he stayed quiet this long, maybe he's just waiting for a reason big enough to speak. And maybe that reason is on the way. Because that necklace, it caught the eye of someone else. Someone no one expected. Someone who grew up in the shadow of a powerful father and is ready to break the silence. Daniel Cage was Vernon's biological son, rarely mentioned in Ayanna's story. He was her older half-brother by 4 years, raised in the same household but walking a very different path. While Vernon built a real estate empire, Daniel became an architect studying in Savannah, then working at a small firm in Macon, far from the family spotlight. Tension between Daniel and his father had always simmered not over money, but over control. Daniel had seen his father build beautiful homes and bulldoze entire neighborhoods to make room for a golf course. He once spoke at a press conference opposing forced displacement and was branded the lost cause of the family ever since. When Ayanna disappeared, Daniel wasn't interviewed much. He hadn't attended the engagement party. He was in Boston, presenting a design project, and most media didn't even know he and Ayanna were siblings. But deep down, Daniel never stopped asking questions. 3 years after the disappearance, while visiting his mother Nadine, Vernon's wife, he stumbled upon an old box in the garage. Inside were dusty documents, architectural schematics for the city's old warehouses, and a folder labeled ET 2010, revised under sealed directive. Daniel's heart skipped. ET East Terminal. The same warehouse where the message had been scrawled on the wall. That same day, his quiet, reserved mother asked him, seemingly out of nowhere, "Have you ever wondered if someone in this family did something wrong, whose side would you choose?" Daniel didn't answer. But something inside him shifted. He reached out to Zariah, a friend from years ago, who had once come to their house back in high school. When she told him about Ayanna's necklace, something in his eyes changed. "That necklace," he whispered. "It sat in Vernon's drawer for a while. I remember because Ayanna cried the day she lost it at our house. And 2 weeks later, it just appeared in his drawer." Zariah froze. She had always suspected Vernon knew more than he let on, but now, someone inside the family confirmed a memory that changed everything. Daniel promised to help. "I don't know if my father was involved in Ayanna's disappearance, but I know he never does anything without a reason. And if he kept something that wasn't his, it meant something." For the first time, Zariah felt someone on her side from the other side. Weeks later, Daniel arranged to visit Wallace Drew, Vernon's former legal advisor who'd served the company for over 20 years. Wallace had retired in 2015, now living in a high-rise built by Vernon's firm, when Daniel knocked. The frail old man opened the door with wary eyes. But when he realized it was the boy who used to play with Legos, his grip on the doorknob loosened. Daniel didn't mention Ayanna right away. He started with memories construction sites with his dad, fake family dinners, the emptiness of being raised by a man obsessed with projects who never once asked what his son dreamed about. Then he spoke of the disappearance, how it had hollowed out those left behind. Wallace sighed. "I used to think your father was just cold. Now I'm not so sure." He stood, retrieved a thick envelope from a filing cabinet, and handed it over. "This shouldn't exist. I kept it partly for my conscience, but also because I knew one day you would come looking." Inside were documents, but one stood out, a blurry photo, taken through the reflective panel of an industrial elevator. In the frame, 3 people, Kamari, Ayanna, and Vernon Cage, all inside the East Terminal warehouse. The timestamp 1:43 A.M., July 25th, 2010. 13 minutes after the last confirmed sighting of Kamari and Ayanna. Daniel's heart pounded. His hands trembled. "He told us he left the party early. Said he never saw them after 10 p.m. Wallace nodded. "There are a lot of things he said." Beside the photo was a floor plan of the warehouse. Several emergency exits had been redacted in red ink. A note read, "Seal off Section D board up by Monday." Signed July 26, one day after Kamari and Ayanna vanished. Daniel didn't copy anything. He left in silence, envelope in hand. He met Zariah at a small coffee shop in West End, where she'd worked during college. When she saw the photo, her grip on the mug tightened until the ceramic cracked, a fine fracture begging to split. "Is this real?" she asked. "It is," Daniel replied, eyes distant. "The question is, why and who's going to answer?" she said softly. Daniel didn't hesitate long. He needed to confront his father, not to accuse. Not for vengeance, but because he couldn't live in the shadows of questions anymore. He chose a Sunday afternoon when Vernon was always home. No meetings, no guests, just cigars and the Sunday paper on the back patio. As Daniel approached, Vernon didn't look up. Finally remembered the way home, he quipped. Without warmth, Daniel laid the photo on the table. "I found this." Vernon glanced at it, then set his cigar down, lifting a glass of whiskey. "So what? That was old business. They were reviewing community housing plans. Ayanna wanted to redesign the layout." At 1:43 in the morning, Vernon shrugged. She was stubborn, always did things her way, and then vanished right after silence. A breeze rustled the maple trees, scattering leaves across the deck. "Do you know they never came back?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Do you know Mom still checks her phone for a message from Ayanna, that her fiancé never deleted her number?" Vernon set his glass down, eyes fixed on the photo. "There are things you don't understand. Choices made not out of malice, but protection." Daniel stepped back. Protecting who from what? No answer. Vernon stood, walked inside, before the door shut. He turned back. Be careful what you dig up. Son, not every truth will set you free. Daniel returned home, weighed down. He met with Zariah and handed over copies of everything. He didn't confess, but he knows. Zariah nodded. So we have everything, the timeline, the image, the floor plan, but no bodies, no confession, no justice. Daniel held her gaze. We have something else, memory. The truth they tried to bury, but if we tell it clearly, painfully, then it lives. They decided to go public. Taylor, the independent journalist, published the story as a full investigative expo. Within a week, it went viral. The community roared, but the authorities stayed silent. No reopened case. No official comment. Then, Zariah received an anonymous email. Just one line. If you want to know the truth, come to the old wall behind the Jefferson Building, Friday night. Attached was a photo, a torn scrap of paper, scribbled in pencil, shaky but deliberate. We're still here. Zariah stared at her phone, looked up at Daniel, and whispered, maybe they're still alive. Friday night. Zariah arrived at the Jefferson Building, a long-abandoned apartment complex in East Atlanta, fenced off years ago for structural safety violations. She came alone. Daniel had protested, hard, but in the end. He waited nearby, parked down the street. Zariah, flashlight in hand, stepped through broken brick and rusted steel. After about 10 minutes of searching, she found the old wall cracked, mildewed, its peeling paint revealing bare brick underneath. At the center was a laminated sheet taped tightly to the wall. Inside, a piece of lined notebook paper, written in blue ink if they won't believe. Remind them of 3-7-1. No name, no date, no camera. Just that slip of paper like a small incision through the silence that had stretched for 13 years. Zariah returned to the car, handed the paper to Daniel. He stared at the numbers, then went quiet. 3-7-1. He whispered, that was Vernon's internal code for warehouse access. Each site had its own number. 371 was Section D. Zariah clenched her fists. Section D. That's the same zone Wallace said was walled off right after the disappearance. They took the information to the police. No response. But when Taylor posted the photo and note to her blog, a standout comment appeared from an anonymous user. 371 isn't just a site code. It's the date they died. Day 3, week 7, month 1 in construction calendar format. Everything's logged that way. Zariah pulled the old East Terminal blueprints and compared them to the 2010 construction logs from Vernon's company. It matched. One entry, buried in a private ledger. Read Day 3. Week 7, Month 1, complete pour of secondary foundation structure, no inspection required. That date. The day after Kamari and Ayanna vanished. If the comment was right, someone had buried something. Not with shovels, with machines, concrete, and bureaucracy. This new breadcrumb just numbers at first began shaking even the most grounded believers. Daniel, once the voice of logic amid grief, now stood at the edge of something darker, his father's empire, everything he'd been taught to admire. Now looked like a mask hiding something too monstrous to name. He stopped sleeping. Guilt swelled in him for trusting too long, for staying silent, for believing that no body meant no crime. He started revisiting old voice recordings from Ayanna, saved on a USB drive since 2009. In one call, she confided, I think Dad's hiding something from me. Dan, not money, something like he doesn't want me to know a part of who I am. Daniel replayed it over and over, and for the first time, he cried, not from fear of the truth, but because he hadn't listened when she was still speaking. Meanwhile, Zariah began questioning herself. For years, she'd been the organizer hosting vigils, rallying the community, writing blogs and podcasts. But now, as the truth sharpened into view, she felt untethered. She had wanted the truth, but not like this. Not one where every trust was poisoned. Not where a father could pour concrete over 2 lives. One night, she visited Ayanna's mother, Cynthia, with the latest papers. Cynthia didn't read them. She just looked at Zariah and asked, If you knew for certain she was dead, would you stop looking? Zaraya didn't answer. But something inside her broke open. Some truths don't bring peace. They deepen the void. As Zaraya left, Cynthia handed her a small item, an old notebook of Ayanna's, found among stored belongings. It was filled with community finance plans, ideas for a microbank, and one final note at the very back. If anything happens to me, don't let them call it an accident. Ask again 3 times. Zaraya closed the book. She no longer felt clear. But one thing remained. The truth was close, and it was going to cost them. As every thread began pointing to Vernon Cadges, the spotlight narrowed. Something unexpected shifted the story. On the night of September 12th, 2023, a cryptic Reddit post surfaced in a forum for unsolved cases. The account Echo Raven 1985 uploaded a shaky, grainy cell phone video. It showed a dimly lit concrete room. A woman's voice whispered, "We're not dead, but we were forgotten." The clip lasted just 11 seconds. At the end, a piece of cardboard was shown, handwritten. "This isn't about Vernon." Taylor was the first to find it. She sent it immediately to Zaraya and Daniel. The 3 sat in a tiny apartment, replaying it frame by frame, no faces, no clear audio. But Daniel stood up suddenly. "That's Ayanna's voice. I know it." Zaraya wasn't sure. She sent it to an audio analyst. After 3 days, the result came back 74% voice match with Ayanna Reed. High confidence, but not definitive. Now, everything flipped. If Ayanna was alive, was Vernon actually protecting her, hiding her from something even worse? Daniel remembered a strange comment from the engagement party. An old associate of Vernon's had joked, "The Kamari kid's a hell of a hacker. Let's hope he doesn't dig up any of our secrets." Kamari once exposed a bank's security flaw, nearly got sued if not for Ayanna's negotiation skills. He knew how to get into places people weren't meant to. Had he seen something? Had they both been running from something bigger? Zaraya looked at the hole forming in their narrative. Maybe Vernon wasn't the killer. Maybe he was the shield, shielding them from what old theories shattered. No one knew who the victims really were, or who was pulling strings. Police remained silent. Media returned. But now, with skepticism, one major outlet asked, did we turn a businessman into a monster just to fill a silence we weren't ready to confront? Zaraya no longer knew what she believed. But one thing was clear. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. And in that darkness, something, or someone, was holding all the cards. December 2023, exactly 13 and a half years since Kamari Brooks and Ayanna Reed vanished. The city of Atlanta opened a brand new commercial complex built directly on top of the old East Terminal warehouse site. The project was called the Revival Blocka, name meant to signify rebirth, reclaiming a space long forgotten. Zaraya stood at a distance, watching the LED lights flicker, listening to the new mayor's speech words of progress, of celebration, of moving forward. Music pulsed from the newly built rooftop Barrett's entrance, now covering what used to be the industrial elevator that led down to Section D's basement. No one mentioned Kamari and Ayanna. No plaques, no memorials, just memory buried beneath glass and fresh concrete. Zaraya walked along the new stone-paved path, past the spot where that red-lettered message once trembled on a crumbling wall. Now, it was a sleek calf. She sat down, opened Ayanna's old notebook, turned to the final page. The words "ask" again 3 times were faded, but still there. She sat in silence, wondering what really happened. Were they killed, or did they have to disappear? Was Vernon the villain, or the one who stopped something worse? Had we been too eager to fit people into roles, believing that the powerful must be evil, and that anyone missing must be a victim? Daniel left Atlanta shortly after the story went public. He left behind a single message. The truth doesn't set anyone free unless they're willing to face it. Cynthia, Ayanna's mother still lived in the small Decatur house. Every morning, she brewed 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one for Ayanna. She no longer spoke of grief, didn't want to hear the word investigation anymore. When Zaraya asked her, "If someone out there still has Ayanna and Kamari, would you forgive them?" She replied simply, "I don't need to forgive. I just want my child to have the right to come back. In the stillness of night, someone is always watching, someone is always listening, and maybe somewhere, Ayanna and Kamari are still alive, like the ghosts of an abandoned truth, unacknowledged, unnamed, but still here, because sometimes missing doesn't mean dead. It means being erased from history by people afraid of what you stood for. Kamari Brooks, Ayanna Reed. Two people, one engagement party, one summer night, one disappearance that, even over a decade later, no one dares to call an ending. We've retold their story, opened every file, listened to every whisper in the dark, faced the ones in power, and those who seemed like bystanders but carried pieces of the forgotten truth. We don't have answers. Maybe we never will. But this much is clear in this world. Those who vanish are often the ones who once dared to speak what others feared, who loved without permission, who looked injustice in the face and called it by name. Maybe Ayanna and Kamari didn't die. Maybe they're living under new names, in a place where no one knows what they left behind. Or maybe they're gone, leaving behind a fracture that can never fully heal. Whatever the truth is, our remembering is what keeps them here. Because in a world that rushes to forget, some names are not allowed to disappear. Kamari, Ayanna, you are still here,